Hi guys, I'm Nathan from Still Moving Media, and this is my series all about frames and fabrics. We're going to be talking through all the different frames available from Avenger. We're going to be looking at lots of different fabrics, their uses, and we're going to dabble in a bit of physics of light to really understand what happens as light passes through or bounces off of a different type of fabric. So let's talk about frames. There are 3 different types of frames from the Avenger offering, the first being modular. These are the most common that you'll find on set, and there are lots of others from other brands. These are individual pieces of metal that clip together and you can build whatever size of frame you need. So how do you build a modular frame? It is really straightforward. We tend to start by laying down all the sections on the floor so we can make sure we're getting the right size, and then we slot them all together. Next, we add the ears by sliding them to the middle of each section, and then finally adding the corners. Once we have a complete frame with the ears, we'll mount it to the stand inside of the jumbo grip head. You're looking to put the ear between the end of the jumbo head and the orange disc. Depending on which brand of jumbo head you're using, it's always recommended to put it in this same spot. These frames are customizable, easy to store, and compatible with fabrics from loads of manufacturers. The ears on them allow you to use them with loads of different stands. However, there are loads of pieces that you need to put them all together. Some of the big ones come with additional parts such as cable. They can be slower to set up and often quite heavy, so you need really beefy stands to hold big frames up. Fold-out frames are quick to set up and really durable. They're easy to quickly get up on a set, get straight out of the truck and build, and they're compatible with fabrics from loads of manufacturers. They're also pretty expensive, and they're a nightmare to store if you have a small space or a small vehicle. So how do you set up a fold-out frame? It's pretty straightforward. Here we're setting up a 12 by fold-out frame. It takes 2 of us to unfold it, and then we clip the ears on. The ears are the things that hold it together and stop it from folding back in on itself. Once it's put together, we're flipping it over and we're going to mount it straight into the jumbo heads on this stand. A lesser known frame in the Avenger lineup is the DIY butterfly kit. This kit comes with 4 corners, 2 ears and 2 straight connectors. This kit is designed to be used however you need it to build any frame size using speed rail kits. If you don't know what speed rail is, it's like scaffolding, but often in a slightly lighter weight metal and powder coated black. To build a butterfly kit, we start by connecting our 2 speed rail points to the center connectors. Once that's done, we connect all of the 4 straights into the corners. Once the ears are tightened, we slot it into the jumbo grip head, just like we would any other frame. Finally, in the Manfrotto line, there's Pro Scrim. Pro Scrim comes in one bag with the frame and up to 3 different types of fabrics, and are fantastic for small crews or when you're having to operate out on your own. They're quick, they're affordable, and they're an all-in-one bag solution. However, there are limited options on fabrics as they are made specifically for the Pro Scrim range. You can't use fabrics from other manufacturers. They're not as durable. They wouldn't hold up to the same wind speeds that a modular or a fold-out frame are going to be able to do. The Pro Scrim range is a great way to take a frame out on location as a self-shooter, or if you're packing light in a bigger team. Because they come in such varied sizes, they're a great solution for traveling. The 1x1 meter, the 1x2 meter, and even the 2x2 meter frames are excellent options if you want to travel with a frame on a plane, or if you're filling up a car that already has loads of kit inside. In this series, we're going to use some jargon. Phrases like transmitted light, words like reflectance, so it's important to understand those before we continue. If you're not entirely sure on some of these words, we have provided a terminology guide for you to use as you follow this series. Let's talk about quality of light. We have direct light. Direct light is unimpeded hard light. That's where you get the really hard shadows and you get a big contrast between the dark and bright areas. Soft light is the result of a direct light passing through a surface. The light is going to scatter as it passes through, and it's going to multiply and it's going to fill in all those shadows. This is where you get that softness. Transmitted light is light after it passes through a surface. There's an important difference here between diffused light and transmitted light. Light doesn't always diffuse as it passes through a surface. For example, as light passes through a glass window, it's not going to diffuse, same as it passes through a water surface. So when we talk about transmitted light, we're going to be talking about light after it's passed through a surface, and we're going to provide clarity on what the quality of light is afterwards. Reflected light is light that has been bounced off of a surface and will change depending on the texture and the color of that surface. Absorbed light is reduced light after it hits a surface. Illumination is how bright your surface or subject is. The angle of the light is the angle at which the light is hitting your surface. The direction of light is the direction of the light source as seen from your point of view or the camera's point of view. We talk about light in light rays. As light hits a surface, it's going to do one of three things. It's going to absorb, meaning it's going to stay on that surface and not bounce back. Reflect means it is going to bounce back. And transmit means it's going to pass through that surface. Fall off is the brightness contrast between the light and shadow sides of an object and the rate change from the light to shadow. Contrast, really simple, it is the brightness range between the shadows and the highlights. Contrast ratio is the measured difference between the dark area and the bright area. Let's talk about diffusion fabrics and all the different types that you can get. Diffusion fabrics are everywhere. They range from bed sheets that you can buy in a homeware shop through to professional balanced materials that are cut to size for specific frames with details like grids to help the light travel in the direction you want it to. In the lighting world, you'll hear people say silk, China, artificial silk, diff, muslin, and all these other terms depending on where you are in the world. Most of the time in the photography world, softboxes are used to diffuse light, as are pop-up diffusion rings, and on bigger sets, often frames. On a film set, frames are much more common, and fabrics as well. They're often also used without frames, and they're held with all sorts of things, such as a T-bar, or sometimes just clipped straight onto a window. Later on, we'll revisit how we use fabrics without a frame. Let's get started. We're going to talk all about diffusion. There is so many types of diffusion to worry about when it comes to fabrics, so we're going to simplify it. Let's break it down. It's not just the type of fabric that impacts how soft a light source is. The hardness or the softness depends mostly on three things: the size of its diffusion surface, its distance from the object, and the thickness of the diffusion material. The bigger the source is compared to the subject, the more wrap you're going to get, which means if you take a really small softbox up close to the subject and replace it with a much larger frame with a fabric much further away, providing of course it is the same fabric, it's going to look roughly the same. Finally, there are different thicknesses of fabric, and this has a massive impact on both how diffused light is after it passes through and the wrap that you're going to get. Let's talk about silks. You're going to find two main types of silks in the lighting world, and this depends on where you are and the local terminology. Starting with China silk. This is real silk from silkworms. It's going to cut the light by around one stop, and this is sometimes called a half silk. Two, we have artificial silk. Artificial silk is a man-made fabric that comes in all various sizes, full, half, quarter, and it is one of the most common ones that you will find. Let's talk grid cloths. Grid cloth is a type of diffusion with really small squares in the fabric in a grid pattern. The grid patterns in the grid cloth are intended to focus sources and not take away too much from the throwback of the beam. This keeps shadow shape and definition. Grid cloths also tend to be much more durable and better in rain and wind. When I talk about throw, I'm talking about the angle and the direction of the light. If I position my frame and my lamp directly in front of each other, I expect my light to travel straight through. It's going to produce a really even light across the entire frame. But if I move my light off to the side and keep my frame at the same angle, I'm going to create what we call gradient. It's where one side of the frame fabric is going to be much brighter than the other. This works great for controlling wrap, and it also works amazingly when you're shooting shiny, reflective products and you want to enhance their volume. Silk versus muslin. Well, there are three key differences: light loss, diffusion amount, and colour change. Silks and muslins will reduce the intensity of your light as it passes through. The amount of light that is lost as it passes through is called light loss. In terms of light loss, it depends what kind of silk you use. Full silk reduces intensity by around 2 2/3 stops. Full silk is going to reduce your intensity a lot more than a China silk will. But muslins can cut around 3 stops depending on which one you use. This is something to bear in mind as you're planning what light is going to be punching through your fabric. Silks, whilst being really good diffusers, allow for a harder, more defined shadow, while muslins tend to be extremely soft. Silks tend to have more of a linear direction of light, and you can see this if you look directly through your silk and you move side to side, you often can see the beam of light behind. Whereas with a muslin, the light is extremely even. The difference is mainly due to how the two materials are woven. Silks generally do not provide any colour change. Muslins though, will have a warming effect. You have unbleached muslin, which is designed to warm up that light as well as diffuse, and bleached, which is designed to diffuse and have a very subtle warming effect. Going back to the diffusion fabrics, they will all reduce the amount of light from the source as it passes through the fabric. This is why diffusion fabrics are named after their light loss. It's a good indicator of how thick they are and how much they're going to diffuse that light. So how can we use diffusion? Well, diffusion has no rulebook. There's no, yes you can do that, no you can't do this. Like a lot of things in lighting and cinematography, when to use diffusion is a creative decision. Most experienced filmmakers and photographers will know which fabric works best for them in certain setups. But more often than not, it's a case of experimenting and seeing which fabric is going to give you the effect that you're after. Choosing exactly what type of fabric is often influenced by how much light is being cut by the fabric, how much spread the diffusion is giving, and the quality of light on the subject. That said, diffused light has some amazing uses for certain setups and scenes, so let's look at how I've used them in the past. Hard light can be a really useful tool to give your shot a really dramatic look. Certainly on a face, it can create really dark shadows and a really moody effect. More often than not, you're going to want to create a slightly more wrapped light. You're going to want to fill in some of those shadows, and this is where diffusion can come in. Firstly, when I'm looking at a face, I'm thinking about wrap. I'm thinking about how far around do I need to take this light and the ratio between the dark side and the light side of the face. The next thing I'm looking at is the volume in the face. How much depth and how much 3D-ness am I looking to get in that face? Lastly, skin texture is really important. Sometimes you want to make the pores in the skin really stand out, and sometimes you want to smoothen out the skin using a really soft, balanced light. Now let's look at hard light versus soft light on product. When I'm looking at product lighting, I'm thinking about volume. What does that mean? Well, I want to give people a sense of how big that product is. Next is texture. Is it important for me to make those textures really stand out and give people a real sense of what that product feels like to touch? And lastly, reflections. How am I going to handle all the reflections in certain types of products? A great way to handle all of these things is to decide where to use hard light and where to use soft light whilst you're lighting your product. Often I'll create wraps of light and gradients around products using big frames and fabrics. To do this, I line my frame up and I fire a light at an extreme angle against the fabric, which creates this spill of light where I get a really bright hot spot that slowly gradients off into darkness. I'll also be using hard light right up close to the product to make the texture stand out and create really dramatic shadows in the pores of the texture. And lastly, when I have to deal with reflections, one of the easiest ways to handle this is by putting a big frame with a diffusion fabric in that reflection. Finally, working outside with sunlight. This is where diffusion frames can come in really handy. You have both the massive 20 by 20 frame setups, and you also have the much more contained smaller setups like a 6 by 6 frame or an 8 by 8 frame. We're into our next section, bounce. So, what is bounce? Bounce light is a great technique and is used loads to light both photo and film scenes. A common misconception is that bounce light is a soft light. In reality, the quality of light is affected by the texture and the colour of the surface it is bounced onto. We've set up a wall plate on a friction arm. The wall plate's made of steel, so it's going to shine light back down and we can see what's happening on the table. Now we've put some white card in front of it and you can see that that shadow's softened right up. You can also see that we've got much more spread on the light now. It's bouncing in a lot more different directions. Next, we put some black card in front of it, and you can see that we've completely lost the level. There is still some return though, and that is when we talk about reflectance. Negative fill doesn't completely cut the light. Here, this black card has a reflectance of about 15%, so we're still actually getting a shadow casting from that black piece of card. It's essential to understand that as light bounces onto a surface, it will take those properties with it as it returns. So here we've also put some blue ProGaff tape onto the wall plate, and you can now see that the scene is blue. And here for reference, we've put another colour on there as well, and you can see that it's taking that colour and spilling it everywhere. So if you're shooting outside in bright daylight and you're shooting next to a big orange wall, you are going to get a lot of warm light returning from that wall. The same goes for any surface in any environment. The light as it bounces around the space will take on that colour. And this is why you can get different types of fabrics with different colours on them to use them as bouncers to bounce colours back into your scene. When bouncing light into a white surface, it will soften it up. So why would you use bounce instead of diffusion? Well, there's a few things to understand here. We've got fall off, wrap, intensity, and space. You can manipulate all of these things depending on the material you're using to bounce your light off of. There is an endless offering of bounce fabrics out there. Some specialist fabric manufacturers produce hundreds of solid colour fabrics in all the frame sizes for loads of uses. Today we're focusing on the main ones that Avenger offer, and we'll briefly touch on some specialist ones too. So let's get into it. Let's start with white bounce. White bounce may seem like the simplest of fabrics offered, but if you've ever gone out to buy white bounce, you'll quickly realise that there are loads of options. So why are there so many white options? Almost all white bounce will return 80% or more of the light hitting it. It will return a softened quality of light, which is why many people use bounce light and soft light synonymously, even though this isn't true. Ultra bounce or solid white is a matte finish white vinyl type material. It is one of the most common types of white bounce you'll find on set. The matte finish gives it a smooth and diffused return with no harsh surface reflections or hotspots. Ultra bounce is a very efficient reflector and often used for shooting shiny objects such as cars, metallic products, and is used in what's called a booklight. We'll explain this later. Heavy white, or windbag, is a multi-acrylic coated white fabric, but it will also cut any light trying to pass through it due to the thickness of the material. It's also much more durable and is used outside all the time. Let's talk silver bounce. Silver bounce is used in all sorts of applications. Like white bounce, it comes in loads of variations which produce all different results. There is hard silver, matte silver, mirrored silver, dappled silver, checkerboard silver, and more. It's going to return the majority of the quality of light that you pump into it. For example, a hard light will bounce back as a semi-hard source. A silver bounce will, however, cool down your source. What do we mean by cool down? It means you're going to get more blue in your light. Dappled silver is a semi-plain polyester fabric which can return less light than a matte or hard surface but still retains similar quality of lights as the source. This can be handy if you don't want to reflect too much light back but you still want a harder light that's going to give you some punch that a white bounce simply won't give you. Checkered silver is a mix of silver and another fabric in a grid formation. This can help you balance two different looks and give you the best of both worlds, such as a white and silver check, which is going to give you a much softer look than just silver, but also a harder look than just white. Whilst silver bouncers are a great tool to have on set while shooting outside, something that certainly in the UK we struggle with is changing weather. Relying on the sun for long takes or scenes is often a risky move, and that's why you'll often see people with big lights punching into silver sources outside to give them some consistency throughout the day. Gold bounce does the same thing as silver bounce and comes in the same variations, matte, hard, and mirrored. The key difference is that it's going to change the colour. It's going to really warm it up and give you that gold glow. Often, gold is used in checkered fabrics. For example, in the Avenger range, we have Sunfire Gold. It's a really fun fabric that mixes silver and gold to balance colour for skin whilst retaining the same quality of light that the normal silver or gold bounce would. What is cut? Cutting light is the concept of removing light or reducing light between the light source and the subject. There are many ways to do this. The simplest is something most people do every day. Closing the blinds at night to stop the light from outside coming through the window when you're trying to sleep. On set, we cut lights in a few different ways. Either we use negative fill, such as a solid black surface, or we use a fabric such as a net, which has very small holes in it that lets limited light through. If you want to completely stop a light source and you can't turn it off, then negative fill is the most sensible choice. Negative fill is a fluffy black fabric that absorbs light. There are, of course, a few options of negative fill. You have your cheap budget versions, which can be a black bedsheet, and you have your professional, high-end expensive ones, such as a commando cloth. This is a very thick and very heavy material that lets so little light through, even sunlight can't be seen through it. Sometimes we just want to reduce the amount of light from a source rather than remove it entirely. To do this, we use a net. A net is used to reduce light in measurable amounts. A single layer reduces transmitted light by about half a stop. Nets come in various sizes, materials, layers and colours. Single net is a single layer which comes in mostly white, grey and black. Black nets reduce light intensity by approximately half a stop, but still retain the original quality of light. It will soften it slightly, and there's some debate as to how much and depending on which net you buy. White single net reduces the light by approximately half a stop, as well as softening the source. Key fabrics are chroma key, like the one that I have behind me here. They are green and blue fabrics, as well as some other colours, that are used as big green screens that you can fly up really high up if you're doing a low down shot, or just put into the background as a normal green screen. I really hope you learned something about lighting. We certainly did whilst making it. Because this industry is so international and everyone has their own way of working, we'd love to hear what you call these bits of kit and how you use them in your home country.